Welcome, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to episode 40 of Redesigning Cities, the Speedwell Foundation Talks at Georgia Tech. I am your host, Ellen Dunham-Jones, a professor in the School of Architecture, where I direct the MS in Urban Design. Those of you in person have been looking at the list of the first 20 episodes. Here's the list of episodes 21 up to today, episode 40, The Economics of Cities. More on that in a minute. But all of these widely varying subjects are available on the Redesigning Cities website and our YouTube and Podomatic channels. So take a look and catch up on any you may have missed. And while we're doing that, I do want to acknowledge with sadness the escalation of violence in the Middle East that started exactly a year ago, as well as the escalation of Hurricane Milton in the Gulf of Mexico to a Cat 5. And that while so many are trying to recover from Helene, including our speaker tonight, who joins us having traveled from storm-ravaged Asheville, North Carolina. So today, I am delighted to welcome Joe Minicozzi to talk to us about the economics of cities, particularly his analyses of property taxes on a per-acre basis. Cities only have a finite amount of land. Does it make sense that they tax lower density areas at a lower rate? Is it fair that lower income areas are often taxed at a higher rate than more affluent areas? What forms of development and redevelopment do different property tax rates incentivize? Joe will share the answers he's learned to these questions in his talk and in conversation with Christy Dodson and Elizabeth Ward-Williams. So Joe was educated as an architect at the University of Miami and at Harvard. Joe has become one of the most influential urbanists of all time. He's on the list, the Planetizen's crowdsourced list. He founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize the market dynamics created by tax and land use policies in altogether new ways. They have produced studies in over 30 states, including several in Georgia, as well as internationally. Elizabeth Ward-Williams is a native Atlantan and has dual degrees in architecture and city planning from Georgia Tech. It's a killer combo that more students should pursue. She continues to wear multiple urban design, development, education hats to advocate for positive change. She's director of urban design at Kronberg Urbanists and Architects, serves on her neighborhood planning committee, is a faculty and board member of the Incremental Development Alliance, and co-teaches the Georgia Tech City Planning and Architecture Urban Policy class with Christy Dodson. Christy also has dual MCRP and MArch degrees from Georgia Tech. She is associate principal at Code Studio and leads the firm's Atlanta office. She marries high-level policy goals with practical implementation and focuses on creative zoning strategies. Yes, that's a thing. I love that term, especially creative zoning strategies that foster more equitable development outcomes. I am super proud to say that both Christy and Elizabeth are former students of mine and have become successful leaders at introducing creative solutions to seemingly wonky, boring subjects. I can't think of two more perfect conversants to pair with Joe to talk about tax policy and urban design. Before welcoming Joe to the stage, I'd like to turn the podium over to Christy to say a few words about the urban policy class that is co-sponsoring tonight's lecture.
Thank you, Ellen. And she really set us up beautifully to really talk about why we're here today. So Elizabeth and I worked together about 6 years ago on a lot of urban infill projects, a lot of housing projects, and anyone that's worked on those projects know that they are really hard to do. They take months, if not years, to get approved. And that's not a story that's unique to Atlanta. This is the story across the country. And we kept asking ourselves over and over again, why are these projects so hard to get built? Why are they so hard to get approved? They really embody all of these issues that we talk about in all of our planning courses we learned out at Georgia Tech: equity, walkability, community-driven projects that embody these goals. And so we did what every sane person would do. Let's teach a course about it at Georgia Tech. So with the support of folks like Ellen, we started a 1-hour seminar and really dove into the issues of zoning and how zoning can create barriers to these types of goals that we try to achieve in cities. And over the years, we've been able to grow that into a 3-hour full course. And so that's allowed us to expand our scope to think about not just zoning, but also things like how our finance markets impact the way we build our built environment, how tax policy, so what we're going to talk about with Joe today, how that impacts the built environment. And so we really ask you during this time, and as you leave this room or you leave this digital environment, to ask yourself, what are the barriers that are making it hard to build the types of places we want to live in? Lean into that question, and we hope that this lecture and moving forward will start to give you the tools to think about that, and also think about how we start to change that, how we start to change these policies that seem benign, that seem like the status quo. How do we as citizens, as architects, as designers, as policy writers, really get engaged in that process? So think about that, and hopefully this lecture will give you a launching point to really lean into that question. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Joe, and we'll get the conversation going.
Thanks, Christy. All right, y'all, can't fall asleep now. We're going to talk about taxes. As Ellen mentioned, I am from Asheville, and I'm just going to start with this. It is as bad as it looks on TV. We're probably not going to have water for 2 weeks, if not 3. I'm a refugee now. I'm living in Greensboro. I took my team out of Asheville. So if there's anything you can do, going up and volunteering is helpful. But if you could just pay attention and maybe contribute or watch what's happening in Asheville and support their growth, I think everybody there would appreciate it. It will come back. When I moved there 10 years ago or 20 years ago, in 2004, we had a flood. Same problem, same issues, same effect. So Asheville's chance now is to do it better. So fix the place better. So I'm gonna start with maybe a couple of issues or way that I talk about design. I'm a designer. Ellen's mentioned that. I'm trained as an architect. There's some lessons I've learned in urban design that I like to share with audiences. So I think that all cities have a form of DNA. If you could take anything away from my presentation, think about your community or communities that you're from and think about its DNA, kind of like I have DNA. So this is how I started, and this is my path. I'll be my grandfather whether I like it or not. There's things I can't change in that. Or more importantly, these are my parents. That's like when I had hair. I also had hair here too. That's 3 months old, by the way. But when I talk to people in their communities, and seriously, go back to your hometown, ask your leaders, ask your parents, what's your town going to be when it grows up? It's amazing how few people have an answer to that. It's really kind of mind-blowing, actually, that they don't have a trajectory. They can't see a model for their growth. And then since we're in a technical school, I'm around a bunch of nerds. Has anybody ever seen me do the questions test before? Okay, you can't answer. Everybody else, I'll give you 5 seconds to tell me, this is really simple, it's a kid's puzzle. Tell me how many shapes you see in this kid's puzzle. You have about 5 seconds to count it. Ready, go. Okay, how many shapes did y'all see? You're not gonna fail, we got 10 back there. How many? 10, 18, how much? 15, oh, we got, okay. Maybe you wanna go higher than 18? Anybody wanna tell me how many kids there were on the school bus? What time was it on the clock? What's kind of comical to me about all the work that we do and all the work that y'all practice is that we'll go into it with a question. We'll go into it with a pre-design of what we wanna look for. So you didn't see that there was, 5 kids on the bus? It was 10 after 10 on the clock? Because I didn't ask you that question. I can't tell you how many design processes I've been in where people go in with a question up front to come to a solution that's predetermined. Just be careful as a practitioner that you don't do that. This whole show is about asking a different question. That's it, all right? So also, this is nerds. Y'all do math. Most people don't. So math is very scary to people. I love this story from on NPR. In Indiana, they started charging $40 to $50 for each student to ride the bus. And the thesis was, you chose to live out there. The bus isn't part of the education system. It's a transportation system. We're not solving that in Indiana. You pay your own way because of your lifestyle choice, right? Very simple. This guy here, Jeff Bennett's complaining because he's spending a half hour each way to pick up his kid and drop off his kid every morning. All right, so there's some math right there. And so that's to drop his kid off at school. So let's do the math problem on this. Jeff spends 30 minutes each way, right? Jeff's time is 1 hour a day, 20 times a month, okay? He's making, the average hourly rate in Indiana is about $28 an hour. So Jeff is spending $560 a month to save 40 bucks. Or Jeff is losing $520 a month. Now you might say, Joe, that's not fair. That's the average wage of somebody in Indiana. Jeff is indigent. Okay, well, he's got a car, but okay, let's go to poverty rate. Let's knock Jeff down to $10 an hour. He's still spending $200 a month to save 40, or he's losing $160 a month. You will run into so many people that'll say, oh, I'm not good at math. I'm afraid of math or whatever. Could you imagine if we said, I don't read? Math is it's just numbers, right? I don't have a finance degree. I don't have a master's degree in accounting. I'm trained to draw pictures. Don't fear this stuff. So the other thing that's kind of really cutting about this article is Jeff's doing this because his son can't walk to school. Put in a damn sidewalk, for God's sakes. Anyway, I move on. Asheville. So y'all have been to Asheville. You know where it is. Beautiful setting, bluegrass music, beer, quirky people that dress as nuns that ride bikes and eat fire, right? Typical place. This is Asheville from the 1920s, second largest city in North Carolina by the time the Depression hit. I don't know if y'all know that. The only city that was bigger than Asheville is Winston-Salem. They cut a highway through downtown, blew the mountain open. I love that it's on a postcard. Isn't that awesome? Come visit our cut right there. Incidentally, the community fought this and said, could you please just do a tunnel through the mountain? And DOT, I'm not making this up, DOT said, we don't have the technology to do a tunnel. And everybody's like, there's a tunnel right there in Tunnel Road. Like, can we just, it's 100 yards away. Anyway, on the other side of the cut, the mall happened and our downtown died. That's the history of Asheville. This is what happened. These are the 1970s Asheville, 1990s Asheville. It's a 1996 Chevy Celebrity. Did y'all visit Asheville? That Asheville? And like a Greek choir, our community said, that's not who we are. We're a rural mountain town. We're not an urban place. We're not Charleston, right? So I worked for this guy's company, Julian Price, as a for-profit. He's a philanthropist who invested in a for-profit real estate development company. Our job was to fix buildings and start businesses. So if you ever went to the Orange Peel, that's ours. And this is one of our buildings before and after. Apartments, basically above a bookstore. And we were doing these things, but the whole time what we're really doing is talking to the community because we're trying to bring information to them. We had biases that people were dealing with. Again, that they had a predisposed question of who they are. We're a rural mountain place. We're suburban. People don't want urbanity. And they basically fulfilled that prophecy. So for us, the city is essentially a finite boundary of land that has to be managed. Those acres are what they are, right? Our state legislator made it illegal for the city of Asheville to annex land. The acres that we have is all that we got. The only city in North Carolina that has that regulation, by the way. So if that's all you have is a limited amount of acres, and if you look at what a government is, a government's to incorporate, and this is Oxford American Dictionary, means to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So when I talk to my elected officials, I say, you're on the board of directors for a multi-billion-dollar corporation, right? This is what you're managing is a city. It's not just your city, it's your county. Same is true in Georgia. The state of Georgia is incorporated, and so is our country. Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert Show. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. And I'm such a nerd, I looked it up that night. And sure enough, that's the US regulation. Any legal nerds in the audience, there it is. We're listed as a federal corporation. This is the form of our government. So we are essentially related to a corporation because we run the corporation. So use it to your advantage. Talk about money, right? So Asheville, I had to use one of your heroes here. Asheville, at $14 billion of value, is 7 times the value of Ted Turner. Would Ted Turner just look at Facebook to make his decisions? Of course not. You know, so I don't expect my city to do that. and I hold them accountable to that. So if you're a corporation managing that boundary is land. Land is your product. If you talk to farmers, farmers all talk in economic terms, the crop yield per acre, the water per acre, labor per acre. So let's use a crop here. This is one of the buildings that we renovated, ground store retail, second floor office, upper story residential. And we took the taxable value from 300,000 to 11 million because the city did a sidewalk project. So thank you, city. Thank you for the garbage can, the bike racks, 2 benches and a street tree. We didn't pay for that, right? The community said we were subsidized because we didn't pay for it. Cool. 300,000 to 11 million represents a 3,500% increase in taxes. Do y'all have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%? Wouldn't you like that kind of return on investment, right? And again, people have biases. They're like, well, Joe, that's $11 million. This Walmart over here is 20 million, right? So that's double the value. But hold on a second. It also took when people see millions of dollars, this is how they behave. Like, ooh, millions of dollars. It's like, yeah, true, whatever. But anyway, when you see the land consumed, this is how much of the farm that one takes. This is how much of the farm that one takes, right? So to look at the gross value doesn't tell you productivity. So to make it apples to apples, what's the crop yield per acre? We're producing 100 times more property taxes per acre than them. We're producing double the sales taxes than them. We're producing a heck of a lot more residential and more jobs. It's kind of comic to me that we've never been trained this inside school to make things apples to apples. I didn't learn this. It's just, we always looked at the gross account. We always looked at the pro forma of how these things look like, but we don't look at the comparative analytics to see that. The opposite of what I'm saying right now is also true. If you're a developer building something, what would you do? I can do a cheaper building and pay less taxes. That's it. There's a perverse incentive to build crap architecture in every community across this country if you start to value things based on property value, right? It's that simple. It has nothing to do with the costs of what it takes to service that thing. The average Walmart, by the way, the average Walmart consumes more in police services than it pays in property taxes. Did y'all know that? So this is the reality of how those things operate. So I want you to realize this isn't complex math that I'm doing here. It's 5th grade division. It's comic how simple this stuff is. Don't overthink this. When we talk about cars, we don't talk about cars on a miles per tank basis, do we? Of course not, because we all know that tanks are different sizes. We say miles per gallon, the numbers change, and we should all be driving BMW Asettas. Sorry to the Prius drivers, 1955 technology is more efficient. It's also way more dangerous. You have a head-on that thing, you're dead. But anyway, I digress. So looking at our data, for every dollar of taxes somebody in single family to the county pays to the county, their brother and sister in the city pays 5 times that. Here's the Walmart, there's the mall, 2-story building, 3-story building, and 6-story building, mixed use. I stayed under the high-rise code. So basically, as you stack your stories, you're stacking your dollar bills. As urbanists, when you start talking about urbanism, this is the numbers that we need to follow it with. This is the why on why it matters for our communities, and also what you're up against. The development world will continue to build this because we're continuing to tax it less than its consumption. That's what you're up against. You can't change the game until you change that policy. By the way, I presented at the International Assessing Officers Conference. I mean, y'all are probably too young to hang out with assessors. I see some older people in the audience. Anybody hang out with assessors in here? I mean, it makes a CNU conference feel like Burning Man by comparison. It's like the squarest conference ever. This guy got up at 8:30 in the morning to do this amazing presentation on how cheap Walmarts are. And I was sitting in the audience thinking, this is brilliant. 3,000 assessors, he's getting all of his property taxes lowered in one meeting. That's efficient, right? But I was having a coronary because I was like, how is he getting away with this? I mean, you have all these government people and he's basically yelling into the room, I'm gonna pay the lowest taxes possible. And the assessors are like, thank you. They're agnostic. If it's low value, it's low value, period. So I went up to the microphone and I asked him, I said, Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he shot back 15, 20 years. We designed the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another one and depreciate it down again. So for your corporation, that's his commitment. That's his value coming into your community, that he only wants to be there for 15 years, and that's the deal. Is that what your deal is? Did you want your town to only have a 15-year life cycle? That's the life cycle of a cat, right? We at least I'm a dog person, sorry. We at least mourn the passing of a cat, right? It's a joke, you can laugh, it's all right. So you don't hate the player in any of this. I don't vilify Walmart about this. They're perfectly smart and perfectly legal. You want to understand the game and change the game if it's not working for you. So, okay, that was one lesson, analyze apples to apples. I would argue people don't see it because we're not visualizing in a way that regular people can understand it. So don't nerd out on things too much. But if I look at your brain and say, I can see your creative brain process versus your brainstem in blue, do an economic MRI of your place. So back to my community, this is my county. I've got non-taxable right there. So it's grayed out, non-taxable, low value in green, high value in purple. This is the Biltmore estate. That's America's largest house. That one house is worth $100 million. Very cool. It's also the biggest house in the country. 180,000 square foot house on 8,000 acres of land. So who's got one of those? One person. Okay, total value per acre. So we've gone from total value to miles per tank to miles per gallon. Here it is in 3D. So when I talk to folks who live out here in Fairview, I mean, seriously, they called my city a cesspool of sin. They got our state legislator to say that. And we were having a downtown meeting and I put this out there and I said, hey, where's downtown? And somebody goes, the big purple mountain. I'm like, that's right. So what's producing all the taxes in the county? That thing. So rather than hate on us, send us a thank you card every once in a while. How about a box of chocolates, right? Anyway, visually show it to people so they can all understand it because they didn't know, you know? They might have known some cousin that lives out here in Hickory Nut Gap or something. By the way, look at Black Mountain. You can see this little downtown popping up right there. It's only 3 stories tall, the tallest building in Black Mountain. So visually, you can see that. So our thesis for our company is to always show people stuff. Don't just talk about it. We want you to see what's going on. When I first started doing this 10 years ago, people are just like, well, that's North Carolina. Our state's different. It's like, all right, well, here's Kansas City. Can you see where downtown is? Bozeman, Montana. Take a guess where downtown is. Manchester, New Hampshire. Even something as small as Brevard, North Carolina. This is 8,000 people. Guess where downtown is? Incidentally, we do a lot of work with strong towns. Y'all might follow us there, but this is spatial analysis for the GIS people. This joke only works for people over the age of 45. I know, but I still am going to use it. Look it up. It's great. Anyway, the other thing that I got was people don't want density. This is super old work here, so I'm going to have some fun with this, but because you're here, I felt compelled to show this. Do you ever hear of Gwinnett County? Yeah. They hired us to do this analysis in 2013. I'd never heard of Lawrenceville. Lawrenceville is the county seat. And I'm not making this up, folks. For the students in the room, this will happen to you, where you're going to get a client that's going to say things like, Joe, you can't say 4 words in Gwinnett County. These are dangerous words in our community. You can't say the word urban, city, town, or municipal in your presentation. They're dangerous words here in Gwinnett County. We're not those people. What do you do when your company is called Urban 3? Right? It's like, I was like, I guess we're just 3. It's like, you have to be gracious. You have to allow them their politics. So we did their presentation. I called up my client and I was like, Kelly Brownlow was the economic development director for the chamber. I said, y'all are 812,000 people. I live in little old Asheville, it's only 100,000. She goes, yeah, but look, sugar, we're 460 square miles. We're huge. Okay. We're outside the Beltway, right? They're outside the perimeter, right? Okay, so we can do some math here. Density is people per square mile, right? So Gwinnett County at the time was 1,900 people per square mile, which is less than DeKalb at 2,800, okay? We had data. So that night I was presenting, I was like, okay, so we've got all this other data here. Here's Mecklenburg County. You're 200 people per square mile denser than Mecklenburg. What's in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina? Yeah. I've heard of Charlotte. Never heard of Lawrenceville or Duluth. Here's Davidson, Tennessee. You're 600 people per square mile denser than them. That's where Nashville is. They produce Nashville with less density. Both of these places have professional football teams. There's no such thing as a Buford Cowboys. Here's Austin. You're double the density of Austin. Raleigh, Asheville, Chapel Hill, North Carolina, inside Orange County. That's what rural looks like. This is not rural. They were stunned. And I was like, all right, well, we did your model. And when my analyst was working on it, I was like, Josh, could you turn it on its side? And there it is. It looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's like the same thing from end to end, but blah, the whole way. The entire county is the same crap. So this is what we typically see. This is why I was shocked. I could see Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Hillsborough, and I could see their cores popping up in each one of these, right? I could see the urban design through the numbers. Y'all did this. So this is the most potent building in all of Gwinnett County right there, left by their grandparents. That's it. They have not beat that number right there. So to kind of rub it in, we put the 3 counties. We turned the camera on the side view of the models for Nashville, Austin, or Travis County, Davidson County, Gwinnett County, and we made an economic heart monitor to pulse them out. There you go. So we got a peak value of 192 million here, peak value of 476 there, and you're flatlining at 8. That night when I was presenting this, one of the county commissioners was like, but we're not urban. I said, ma'am, I never used that word, not once in the entire presentation. I called you dense. And I should have said pun intended, but I didn't. But I said, look, you've got all the same horizontal infrastructure as this, is if you look at the width of that, is this. So you've stretched out the same distance. Do you have any of the vertical stuff to pay for that spread? Are y'all broke yet? And she goes, oh yeah, we're broke. There you have it. These are your choices. You made these choices. You're going to live with them, or you need to change your thinking. It didn't work out for you. So by the way, a couple years later, I was in Johns Creek. I did that bit for them. They're all laughing. So I was like, all right, here's Fulton County, right? You can see downtown, you can see Midtown. There's Johns Creek out there. Okay. How are you any different from Gwinnett County? By the way, this really pissed them off. They got really mad at me, and I'm like, just data. There you go. You've built essentially them. So here's Johns Creek. I don't know if you know this. This is Asheville. And then we colored Asheville at the same scale as Johns Creek, so you can see how much more purples we've got versus Johns Creek. Check this out. Did y'all know that Johns Creek is as big as Asheville from a population standpoint? Like, these are choices you made. You could have built a downtown somewhere in there, but here's the kicker. They're almost as big from a population standpoint. They've got a much higher density than Asheville. And this is the average value per acre versus us, or sorry, peak. So the top of our model versus the top of theirs. And the total value of their city is $4 billion less value than us. This is a choice that they made. This is what they built based off their value and judgment. So here's Johns Creek side by side with Asheville. And we went ahead and dropped Charlotte in there because Charlotte's density at 2,600 is the exact same density as Johns Creek. So for any of the nerds out in the audience, there's some good fun data out there that's just ripe for the picking when you do these models. And again, it's just a matter of how do you show people this? And these are, again, opportunities. They could have been in Asheville and they could have been in Charlotte based on that density. So the other thing about the Fulton County model is check out Serenby over here, just killing it. So look at how it's popping up. Okay, these are choices that they've done. Now they have to figure out how to fix their community. But imagine like you move all of your furniture in, and then you want to put your carpet in. It's way more expensive to do it that way versus what they're doing. And here's just one more slide on that. Here's downtown Duluth side by side with downtown Asheville. And check out the density of Duluth versus Asheville. So anyway, by the way, you can go to our website. This is a free scale comparison model that we let everybody use. So feel free to steal it. It's a fun tool. Let me kind of jump ahead. I'm just going to skip these slides here. So the other thing that we do, if that's the revenue side, let's talk about the density. We just did a project in Springfield, Missouri. This is their local billionaire. He runs this awesome company, but he wrote this book called The Great Game of Business that talks about transparency. And I love this. A business should be run like an aquarium where everybody sees what's going on, what's going in, what's moving around, and what's coming out. So here's their revenue model. You can see where downtown is. They actually have 2 downtowns. This is the old downtown in the Red Line area, and this is the new downtown. And they've kind of like spread southward because this area was heavily green and blue lined down here. So that's their sprawl. They run mostly off sales taxes and a little bit of property taxes. So we made a model floating the property tax on top of the sales tax. So again, be honest with your data. Don't let your biases get in the way. The Bass Pro Shops world headquarters is right there with this massive retail outlet, and it's killing it. There's its property taxes. So, but how many of those can you have in your community? One. Can't have another one for that population. So check out downtown. You got two of them, and they're both beating the Bass Pro Shops. The data will show you exactly what's going on. The other quirk for anybody that's doing public administration, we've been working with the Government Finance Officers Association to get them to change this one policy. Finance officers list roads as assets. They are not assets. My computer is an asset. My delivery van or my building for my office are assets. I can sell you all the computer, the van, or the house, right? Can Gwinnett County sell its roads to DeKalb County? No. It's got to be seen differently. So what's going on is, like, if I'm a developer building this mall, I know that I have to fix the air conditioners every once in a while to maintain my asset, right? So those air conditioners are going to be really expensive every 20 years, about $85,000 a pop. And then I have to pay for the sky crane and the crew to come out, right? That's an expense that I have to budget in my pro forma to make that building work. So every 15 to 20 years, I've got to shovel out about $200,000. And that needs to be designed into my rent to be able to pay for that, because I just can't pull it out of my pockets, right? So if we did the same thing with cities and said, here's when you built your first wave of roads, and then you've got roads built in 1970 that come due in 2020. So you're dealing with that right now, that first wave of repair from 1970. But check out, you've got roads older than that are going through a second wave, and you're about to hit a third wave, and you're sitting out right here. You're going to be hitting more expense. For the younger folks in the audience, this is the ticking time bomb that has been left to your generation and my generation. Period. The reason why when you go around old cities and you see beautiful architecture, incredible parks, the old cities are so much better, is because we didn't blow our money like this. Now we're just spending all this extra cash just to keep up with the roads and the infrastructure. So here's their revenue sitting on top of the costs. This is a side view of the model. So if Logitech knew how much the plastic was in this clicker before they put it in the market, right? That's how they stay in business. Shouldn't we do it with the buildings? That if we know what you're paying versus what it costs for you to live there. So this is what you're paying, this is what you cost, this is your net position. And what's in the net what's net black is positive, what's in the net red or net negative is in the red. They had a deficit citywide of $48 million. They can't afford the whole city if a collector came due. But basically 20% of their city is covering 80%. So rather than saying sprawl is bad, as we're trained to do as planners, what we do is we say, can you afford it? Right? I don't care. Make your decisions. You want to go and live that way? Fine. You can't afford it. These are choices they've made. Make better choices, but you can't choose this stuff until you see the data. This joke again won't work for other people in the audience. I don't know if y'all know Brady Bunch, but I call this the Brady Bunch slide. We have residential across the top, commercial, mixed use, low density, medium density, high density. Because they depend their whole city on sales tax, all residential sucks, some worse than others. And then here's mixed commercial and here's mixed use. So you need to have more of this stuff to support that. It's that simple. Again, not judging people on their choices, just letting them see the data so they can be better informed. Also, the way that we run cities, by the way, I'm wearing the same suit and tie. Seriously, go out to a public meeting and sit and watch how people run public meetings. The planner stands up on the stage and goes, well, what do you all want? And everybody's like, I want a dog park, I want a running trail, I want affordable housing. It's like, this is how you run things? Like, I want to be 6 foot tall and have a full head of hair. I think you all should pay for it, right? That would make me happy. How silly is that? Shouldn't we be honest with the citizens and say, well, that dog park's going to cost this. It's not going to pay any taxes. Who's going to cover that cost? How are we going to fix it? Let's start running the numbers on this stuff so that we can better inform our citizens on how they make choices. By the way, when I was doing the Springfield show, we went out after we did the revenue And I presented to the staff, the city manager, all of the senior directors were there. There's about 100 people in the room. And I made a comment because as we were driving around, we didn't see any trees in the sidewalks. And I just asked the meeting, I was like, why don't y'all have trees in your streets? And some guy in the back of the room who works in the engineering department raised his hand. I'm not making this up. And he goes, well, trees attack the streets and the sidewalks. And before I could stop myself, I said, do you know how to build a tree pit? Like, come on now. And I stopped. And that's all I had in my head was like Freddy Krueger showing up and like attacking the sidewalks or something. But this is how people think. So I didn't come back to my office and say, okay, we need to find a way to just kick this guy in the shin about climate change, right? Because that's the problem. But instead what we did was said, let's run the numbers on his bias. So their stormwater system is currently at a $9 million a year deficit. They're currently underspending. So when I went back out to the community, I said, y'all don't have enough money in your stormwater system. You're missing $9 million. But if I went out and built your stormwater system, this is what it would take. It would cost $600 million to just replicate what you have, right? Okay. So let's consider why that's there. So the stormwater system is there. We make these charts of cities into really simple graphics. That's the city. Here it is as a chart or diagram. That's how much building square footage you've got. This is your parking, this is your roads. I find this incredibly awesome that they've got more parking than roads. It's crazy. But this is how the American city is built, right? Those are your choices. So because of that, this is your impervious and impervious, right? So that's the parking, buildings, and roads at the same scale as the city. And what that does is it shoves 14 billion gallons of water out of the city. That's why you need stormwater, right? So you can measure that. So let's consider a tree for a second. A tree is part of the stormwater system. It's essentially two sponges on a carbon stick. That's what a tree does. It's a pipe, right? It's going to absorb water in the sky and get water out of the ground. So this is what a tree does in Springfield, Missouri, as far as engineering wise. And this is what it translates for all of their trees in their community. And what that amounts to is a savings in the stormwater system of $2.2 million a year. And this is how we presented it to them. We said, look, if you plant more trees, maybe you can catch up with that deficit. They're bringing you money, $2.2 million. How many city attorneys did you buy with that? That's a pretty good deal. So here's an idea, plant more trees, right? Now, the immediate pushback is trees cost money. Well, we can do the math on that. This is the cost of maintaining a tree and planting a tree per year for the life of the tree. This is what you get per year out of the tree benefits from the stormwater system. So that your net positive per tree of $40 a tree. So if you plant 10,000 of them, you could afford 4 police officers and all of their cars and equipment and everything else. So help the police officers out. Why not? The other thing that we had, because we had the data, this is their city, 83 square miles, 170,000 170,000 people. This is Eugene, Oregon at the same scale, 35 square miles. Check this out, 5,000 more people. They have parking, just a lot less of it, right? Stacking it up and looking at some data, they're 2.4 times more land per person in Springfield versus Eugene. So their attitude would be like, we're the Midwest, we like to stretch out, right? Cool, that's America. Do you, have fun. But you've also stretched your buildings out. You've got 1.7 times more building footprint horizontally, which means more stormwater. You also have more road area per person, but here's the kicker. You've got 2.4 times more parking than they do, which is insane. So the result of that is you spent $180 million more in your stormwater system than they did. It's not like they don't have a stormwater system. In fact, it rains more here than there. So this is the cost and consequences of your land use choices. Could you afford $180 million? Since you're just pissing it away like that, give me like a third of that. I'd be happy about that, right? You guys is this too nerdy or too depressing? You're not laughing anymore. Come on. So we said, well, if you spend that $180 million on trees, you would have made $96 million a year to put in your budget. Now, to show you the effect of that, this is their ARPA money that they got from the federal government that was a lifesaver at $40 million. That's a one-time deal. They could have twice that in perpetuity if they just plant more trees. When I walked out of that meeting, the engineer made a comment to somebody. He didn't realize I was behind him. And he goes, wow, we need to plant more trees. That was an awesome presentation. He had no idea that I was making fun of him the whole time. You know, it's just, but if I had gone in and talked about the air quality of trees, how they do the heat island effect, how I feel around a tree, that's not going to get me anywhere, right? Be very aware of your audience and who they are and who you're dealing with and what motivates them. So, and also realize that government is set up this way. Some of you don't even know what this is, but this is how we operate the world now, right? Government is not catching up as fast as where you all are with technology. We'll talk about AI. We'll talk about sensors in the street for parking and all of this stuff, but realize they can't even keep a photocopier working in the government, typical governments. We have to meet them where they're at. So let me kind of skip ahead here and get to some fun stuff. So in 2019, y'all know what redlining is. I'm not going to go into that in detail. We were doing work in Kansas City. They asked us to analyze redlining. I'm like, oh yeah, I could see it in the model. It's right there. When you cross Troost Avenue, notice how it flattens out. So redlining went from 1934 to 1968. 1968, we stopped doing it. Here we are in 2019, and you can still see the effect. Now, one of the reasons why this is Troost Avenue, you can see it's heavily redlined on that side, and that yields a problem in the model. So I told them, I'm like, you know, we stopped doing this in 1968, right? So somehow in the model, every district from the green line to the blue line areas to the yellow line to the red line, it takes a haircut from a value per acre standpoint through the whole model. On the Kansas side, it's even worse. And as we were doing this, I mean, we all know the world stopped, the pandemic hit. There were the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. The world pivoted. I approached my community because my community adopted, both the city and the county adopted reparations. I don't know if y'all know that. There were New York Times headlines, Asheville did this awesome thing, and I'm a resident of Asheville. I know that was all talk and no action. So I volunteered my company to do an analysis of the property assessments. So our thesis was, does the property assessment still have redlining baked into it? Here's our redline map. South side was heavily redlined. Here's my county. This is a race map. And then you can see the racial patterns pretty clearly. It's Appalachia, it's very white, but there's a chocolate core in the middle of our city. And what a lot of people don't realize about Buncombe County, Asheville bends around this thing called the Biltmore Estate. So the Biltmore Estate isn't part of Asheville. And even deeper looking into this, Biltmore Forest is its own town that was built by the Vanderbilts. 99% white. Across the street in Asheville is Shiloh, which is 54% black. My friend Reggie lives in Shiloh. And at the time we did the analysis, I'm not making this up, Sydney Powell lived in Biltmore Forest. She's since been arrested here, I think, right? And then she lives in Dallas now. But we compared Reggie's house to Sydney's house, and here they are. Just some key metrics. Start with the dirt per acre. That gets rid of any improvement on the property. It should be a little bit more unbiased, and that seems fair. Her dirt is worth more per acre than his, okay? But then I looked at the building value per square foot. This is what I saw. Architects in the room? Does this make any sense? I sat down with my assessor and I said, I'm trained as an architect. Can you explain to me how on God's green earth is his house worth more? And then the biases start. The assessor's like, well, she's got more square footage. I'm like, oh, it's like toilet paper. The more house I get, the cheaper it gets. That's awesome. He's like, well, there's our standard. And I'm like, where'd you get the standard? Taxes per acre, he's paying more. And here's the kicker. In North Carolina, we do our assessments every 4 years. So from one assessment to the next, his has gone up double hers. And on her property card, she's renovated and he hasn't. What's going on here? So as we were doing the analysis, I don't know if you know this, but the New York Times did an opinion piece saying that the system is is more expensive properties are undervalued while less expensive properties are overvalued. And this professor from University of Chicago, Chris Berry, did this amazing study where he did it all across the country. And I call these J curves. It looks like a J lane on its side, but it's basically the lower the value of your house, the higher your assessment, the higher the value of your house, the lower the assessment. By law, every state constitution says your taxes should be uniform. It should be a straight line across this model. So if we tax everybody 6 mils or 8 mils, but then you change the price of the structure, is it a fair tax? The answer is no, which means it's a constitutional violation in every state. There it is, writ large. So we analyzed our community. Is this too depressing? We good now? Yeah. This is a house. Here's what the computer assessed it at. And seriously, go talk to the assessors and they're like, well, our CAMA model. And I'm like, what's a CAMA model? What does that mean? The Computer Automated Mass Appraisal System. And I asked them, what is the Computer Automated Mass Appraisal System? The more you talk to them, you realize it's just an Excel spreadsheet. Like, this isn't fancy. There's no there's more technology in the PowerPoint show than the CAMA model. But here it is. That's what it came up with. Here's what it sold for. So be it not for that transaction, that individual is paying 27% more taxes than they should be because the computer overassessed it, right? We don't get a chance to see what the market will tell it is until it actually transacts. So the longer somebody stays in the house, the more they're going to be overpaying for government, right? So there it is. That's called an overassessment. Here's one where the computer got it right. And here's one where the computer was off by a whopping 50%. So this person's top is overpaying 27%. This person's paying half what they should be paying for their government. Okay, that's how the system works. That's called a sales ratio analysis. Taking all the housing stock and stretching it across from the poorest house to the richest house and breaking it into 10% buckets. For the statistic nerds in the audience, this is called a longitudinal analysis. Take each one, you want to look at the average of each of these 10 deciles. They should be flat as a pancake. In my community, it looks like this. So what's going on in my community is we're overtaxing the bottom 40% and undertaxing the top 60%, of which I'm somewhere in here. So I'm benefiting. But we're overcharging $1 million and undercharging 6. So the total unfairness per year is about $6 million or $7 million in the system. So I met with my county commissioners and I said, there you go. You want to fund your reparations, $7 million a year. I was met with rose petals thrown at my feet and hugs. No, I wasn't actually. My company got hit with a tax penalty, which was super awesome. It cost me $600. So we just kept on going. So here's the law. Okay, I don't know, any attorneys in the room? One. He has no magic, folks. He can read, right? So here we go. This is the law. Let's not be intimidated. Uniform appraisal standards, a true value is what somebody will pay for the house and a willing buyer and seller, right? That's not hard. So let's see what's going on. Here's a house in the South Side neighborhood. Here's what the computer assessed it at. Here's what the willing buyer and seller did right there. Okay, so this is overassessed at 16%. Now this went through a thing called a general parcel review. So there's something quirky about the deed. So they went ahead and just double checked it with a human. So the human came out, this is the human, right? Cool, you're following the law. We all read the law, right? Here's another one. In this case, the computer underassessed it, the human brought it up. Okay, let's go from low wealth individuals and low status neighborhoods to somebody in the high wealth, high status neighborhood. I have to change scales, okay? So here's what it sold for. Here's what the computer assessed it at. And I turned to the assessor and I said, Keith, if my child brought home a test score of 50 on a test, I kind of want to know what happened. Can you tell me what happened here? He goes, oh, it's complicated. I'm like, hold on a second. I don't trust you. The reason why I don't trust you is because here's what the human did. You had the test score right there. We all saw the law. He's like, well, that's just your cherry picking. I'm like, okay, here's another one. Are we seeing a pattern? This one here is my favorite. The moral courage to bring it up 1 whole percentage point. Boy, you're so awesome. You're really doing a community solid. So this person on the far left, right over here, or left, that person and how many of their neighbors are covering that subsidy? Well, we did the math on it. So it took these 5 houses or 5 properties to cover the subsidy of this one house on the mountain. This is patently unfair. And the other thing is, what's comic is we're using their technology. We're using the same Esri technology they have. We're using all of their data that they produce. They do an awesome job doing this. They just never use GIS as an analytic device. And we said, just do this. Just ask the computer the value change in 1 year, and you can see where somebody's being screwed right there. Don't leave it to that individual to appeal their taxes. Just use it with the model. Zooming into my neighborhood right here, check this out. So I live like right about over here somewhere. My office is right there, but I asked my assessor, I was like, what's going on right here? And he goes, well, that's a different tax neighborhood code. Did y'all know there's tax neighborhood codes? I didn't. And so I asked him, I said, who drew that map? He's like, I don't know. I'm like, so there's something that affects value. You don't know why it's there. So zooming in, 2 properties right here. Here they are in real life. So the dirt under that house shot up 300%. The dirt crossed the property line, and this dirt only moved 200% less. And I asked him why. He's like, well, I don't know. Now, I'm trained in city planning, urban design, basically city planning for architects, city planning light. Do a lot more design, right? I can tell you that Montford Avenue is where the streetcar ran. What was against the streetcar? All the rich white people lived along the streetcar. Where did their help live? A block or 2 away. That legacy effect of redlining is also baked into the property system through these things called neighborhood codes. This has a penalty baked into it. You can see it right there in the image. Let's go back to Reggie's house. So notice how Reggie's neighborhood codes are all level, right? So when you talk to the assessor about Reggie's neighborhood, we hear, hey, Joe, it's not my fault, it's your fault, Eric. You moved into that neighborhood, you set the new value, we all saw the law, so everybody should be that same value because Eric's gentrifying and changing the neighborhood. It's Eric's fault. We've talked about gentrification in city planning, right? Yeah? When you cross the street here and go to the richest neighborhood in North Carolina, there were 2 transactions right there. Why did it not affect the rest of the neighborhood code? Anybody know that? So gentrification doesn't happen in rich neighborhoods. So this is one of my favorite properties. Seriously, do this. Go to the rich neighborhoods and look at how things work. This is the Blue Ridge Parkway. So this is our waterfront. This is a 22-acre parcel with a 16,000 square foot house on it. We all need one of those. Let's read the property card. I mean, Eric can probably read this. In 2011, what was the value? $4 million. In 2021, what was the value 10 years later? $3 million. It's lost a quarter of its value in 10 years. Did y'all know that rich people's properties are declining in value? Now we'll put aside the fact that this should be a $25 million property. So not only is it discounted, it's showing blight. I mean, it's like here, so we did the analysis. We just did an over-under in the rich neighborhood. 50% of the properties are losing value for a net loss of $40 million. When you talk about gentrification, do you ever talk about rich neighborhoods? Anybody that's an advocate for affordable housing, please don't just stay in that lane. So the Chads and Brads of the world really need our help. We need to start an urban renewal program for wealthy white neighborhoods. I mean, can we get that going here at Georgia Tech, please? It's so hard. Anyway, so that translates into $4.4 million of loss or subsidy per year, and Shiloh's overpaying $1.5 million. I've actually presented this to homeowners in Biltmore Forest, and they're blown away. They're like, we just assumed everybody. Well, it's because that's all they do is talk to rich people, and all of their friends are losing value. They just assumed that was what the system was. They assumed there was some law. Now, I'm sure it's not all nice people in there, but until you know, so $4.4 million is a sacrifice of 111 school teachers. That's what my community is missing. So when we talk about this stuff, I find that we're always playing checkers in the middle of a chess match. We're talking about inequity without understanding the full scope of the inequity that's in it. So going on inside my community, my red line neighborhoods are increasing at 21%, while my green line neighborhoods are only increasing at 5%. So let me just close here. I know I'm over time. This is a form of reverse Robin Hood. We're essentially robbing from poor folks to subsidize rich folks. It's that simple. And I would argue the system needs a change, and you all need to be advocates to do it. So if I can show you what's going on in a concert And when we get feedback, we know which knob to turn. We should know which knob to turn in the assessment system. If anybody wants to have a fun thesis project, seriously, go camp out at the assessor's office and ask a lot of questions. None of it will make sense. So the other thing is, we're not alone in this. The New York State Supreme Court this year said this. This is a finding by our state Supreme Court. Nearly everyone agrees that property tax system is inequitable, opaque, and puts a burden on low-income people. The system is unfair. Several mayors have unsuccessfully pledged to change it, and it results in racial and economic disparities. This is from 1873 New York. What did they find then? If the law was enforced, the burden of taxation would fall equally upon all having property to the assessment. But as it is now everywhere disregarded, taxation is unequal, unjust, and oppressive. Why are we still using the same damn tool for this last 100 years and not looking at it? How many conversations have you been in talking about affordable housing, inequity, racism, and you've never mentioned what's causing that? I'm going to end you with one last thing. I'm kind of a nerd. You probably haven't figured that out by now. But I bought this book from 1895, written by Edwin Sullivan. It's got a sexy title called Essays in Taxation. I'm just going to read this out loud. I don't typically put a lot of words in my shows. Practically, the general property tax is actually administered as beyond all doubt one of the worst tax systems in the civilized world. Because of its attempt to tax intangible as well as tangible things, it sins against the cardinal rules of uniformity, of equality, and of universality in taxation. It puts a premium on dishonesty and debauches the public's conscience. It reduces deception to a system. It makes a science of knavery. I love that. It presses hardest on those least able to pay and imposes a double taxation on one man and grants entire immunity on the next. In short, the general property tax system is so flagrantly inequitable that its retention can only be explained through ignorance or inertia. We're all ignorant on this, folks. It is such a cause of crying injustice that its alteration or abolition should become the battle cry for every statesman and reformer. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
I guess let's dive right in. So great presentation, great content as always. I have had the opportunity to see you present a number of times now, and I always walk away feeling on the overwhelmed side. And not just because of all the content and data that you like to throw at us, but because the things that you're talking about are really hard, really sticky problems. And I walk away kind of wondering, okay, well, now what? What am I supposed to do with this information? Now that my mind has been blown, what's the next step here? And as Christy talked about in our urban design policy class, it started as a zoning and land use class. And we're talking about a lot of the same challenges that you highlighted, growing inequality in cities and financial unsustainability, whether it's for individuals or for entire places. And we and our students, I think, often feel that sense of overwhelmedness and kind of hopelessness of like a lot of the things that influence the outcomes are outside of our control, whether it's like interest rates or the cost of land or the cost of materials, things like that. But something that is within our control collectively generally are our laws and our policies. And so we spend a lot of time talking about zoning reform, land use reform, like what are things, how do we advocate for policy reform? Because these things should collectively be within our control. So from a tax policy standpoint, how can everyone in this room, particularly as designers and planners, how can we show up and be advocates for reform with more equitable tax policies?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that for me, I had extremely bad role models from my professors, and I went to University of Miami with two of my professors are Liz Plater-Zyberk and Andreas Delani, and it's hard for anybody below the age of 50 out there to understand how insane it was in the 90s, when if we just mentioned, could we have a sidewalk? You were treated like you were a pariah, that you were out to kill people and bludgeon them out of their cars. I mean, just how many years you've been at it. This is something you just have to be tireless about. You have to talk about it. But the first thing is there needs to be an awareness. You know, I'd come from Rome, New York, this tiny little town in upstate New York, Rust Belt town. I had no idea about zoning codes or any of that stuff. And here you have an architecture school teaching zoning. That was an anathema. It was very rare to find that. Now we know what new urbanism is. We know that mixed uses aren't going to kill anybody. You know, you actually find mixed use in a zoning code. I mean, seriously, when I was in the 90s, you couldn't find mixed use in zoning codes. You're either commercial, residential, or industrial. That's it. So if you look backward a little bit and say that there are people that had success, now could this success have been better? Sure. Could it have come faster? Definitely. But now we have cities talking about removing parking mandates. I mean, it's just, don't let yourself get beat up over this. It's like, do I think I can change tax policy when people have been doing this since the 1800s? Hell no. But I can help you all be aware that it's an issue, you know, that it's not some Moses didn't deliver our tax policies, right? But it takes us reading them and asking questions and pointing out that the emperor has no clothes. That's the only way you can get them changed. My assessor got fired, what was it, September, like last 2 weeks ago? It took 4 years to get his ass fired. Sorry, Keith. Some of this was his doing. But I had to go into it graciously, allowing him to be part of this and to allow him to defend himself. He made choices to dig his heels in, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. So am I loved in my community for this? Some people. There are some people that hate me for it, but whatever, it's the right thing to do. So anyway, I don't know if that helps, but just you know, when you find something and somebody doesn't give you a rational, reasonable answer, dig in. Ask the next question.
I love that idea of digging in and this idea of, is it ignorance or inertia? Because it's often one of those two things. And a lot of what we talk about in our class, you know, now zoning, everyone's talking about, there's this history in redlining, there's a lot of inequity baked in. And so I think there's a growing awareness of how things like zoning and our development policies really have exacerbated a lot of those issues. And so as academia has grown aware of this, as the profession has grown aware of this, it is starting to trickle into elected officials starting to talk about it. And one thing that we find is we're working on a lot of land development codes and regulations. We're working with elected officials, and there's this paradigm of you're asking elected officials to solve generational issues, and they're working on short-term election cycles. So do you have any advice as you think about that? You know, we've been thinking about it from a zoning perspective. You're thinking about it from a tax policy perspective. How do you start to bridge that gap of saying, we need to start thinking about these issues now? And I think the visualization and reframing and knowing your audience, that's a huge piece of it. But what advice do you have as we think about bridging that gap of, I need you to I'm asking you to take a risk for the long-term good of this community, even though it may be painful in the short term?
Well, the thing about elected, are there any elected officials in the room? Probably. Well, no, hang on. There's probably some online, but there'll probably some that may watch this. I just don't want to be too rude. I mean this in the best possible way. Elected officials win a popularity contest. You know, they want to do something to help their community. I actually don't fault elected officials for not getting it. I blame the professionals. The most important image in that whole entire presentation was that picture of my mom. My mom has a high school education. I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure some of the students here will relate, when I learned something here and I'd go home for summer break and start to pitch this stuff on my mom, like pitching walkability on my mom. And she's like, what do you want for dinner? And I realized it was me nerding out about the transect and the walkability of this code. And do you ever see the grid structure? And my mom's like, I don't, what do you want for dinner? And I realized it was me. I had gone so deep nerd on her with my new knowledge that I talked right over her. You know, and politicians, they're dealing with all this stuff. And what they're dealing with is you as a transactional basis. You're giving them information. They're going to say, yes, yes, yes. They might not have any idea what's going on. We go out of our way at our company to find a visual way to communicate it, because 65% of every audience are visual learners. That whole first part of my show up through Asheville is a training session so that I can go really fast through information, and you're generally going to catch what I'm talking about. And they're just bar charts, really. Don't overthink this stuff. Just visually communicate so that you want to convey understanding. The world is swimming with data, but we're lacking understanding. And just heaping more data on people isn't going to help.
Yeah. So kind of along those lines, no, I feel like maybe Christy and I have both fallen into the trap of thinking that we can solve everything with education. And it's just like, oh, well, if everyone just understood the issues behind zoning, then surely everyone would come out and vote in support of these things, and we'd all be on the same page and crisis averted. But that's not the case. And we're, we tend to kill people with data too in terms of zoning, but we still see kind of time and again this contradiction between what people will say they want and agree to at a high level, sort of a comp plan vision level of we want to be affordable and we want to be diverse and we want to be equitable. But then when it comes down to voting for things, and it's definitely this way with zoning, I assume it's similar with tax policy that, we think taxes should be fair. But then if you ask everybody, do you want to pay higher taxes? They're probably going to say, no, I'm not going to vote for higher taxes. So.
Here's the thing. So that's the pushback that I got in Biltmore Forest. And this guy literally said to me, okay, I'll give you the full story. I had to speak at the realtors board. One of my friends was a realtor is like, this needs to be at the realtors board immediately. But I had to go through two gatekeepers, this guy, Mike and David, and both white men, both in their 60s or 70s. And David is the prototypical Asheville hippie. And Mike likes to brag about being Republican, which is a unicorn in Asheville. He's the only one. And I'm doing the presentation on Zoom and Mike just goes nuts. He's like, wait 1 minute, Joe. Wait 1 minute. And I reached on the side of my desk and I keep a 4-inch violin case over there. And I grab my violin case and I'm like, keep going, Mike. And I open up the violin case. He's like, if my taxes go up, I can't afford to live in my house. And I put the violin on my shoulder and I start playing it. And I'm like, oh, you poor thing. So everybody else should pay higher taxes so that you can afford to live in your house. Oh, Mike, that's going to go over real well. And he stops and he goes, that's real funny, Joe. And he goes, and David the whole time was just busting up laughing. And I said, Mike, look, I don't, it's not about drawing blood out of your hide. Can you agree that it's unfair for Shiloh to pay 120% of taxes and you're paying 60%? And he goes, yeah, that's unfair. I'm like, if you're getting 60, they should get 60. Let's just make it fair for everybody. And he's like, yeah, that's fair. Just finding how he was going to push back and giving him a relatable way to digest it. Now, back to education. I had the same problem when I went to work in government. And our city manager brought in a political scientist to do a breakdown of our population. And I was one of those planners was like, I can give everybody education and we're all going to be awesome once we're educated and things are going to fall into place. And I'm sitting there in front row watching this presentation. And this guy breaks our community down. He goes, you've got 6% of your population that are visionaries. Every community's got these folks. They're your artists. They're your thinkers. They like to throw solutions out there. Don't ever put them on a committee. You'll kill them. Just go to them when you need problems solved. They might not have rational solutions, but they'll give you a solution. There's another 15% of the population behind that are the leaders. These are people that step up and join committees. They get involved in boards. They run for office. That's who makes the community work. Don't expect anybody else to do it because the majority of your population are sheep. They honestly don't care. They just want the thing to function. They're too busy with their kids, the soccer classes, or whatever. They just trust the system to work. Then you've got 6% of the population at the other end that are your cave people. These are the citizens against virtually everything. They will not take education. They cannot be worked with. Don't even waste your energy.
So we have to target the leaders.
Well, so then one of the leaders said, hang on a second. 6% are visionaries and 6% are cave people. How do I tell the difference? Which is a great question. And the consultant goes, well, it's easy. When somebody comes to you with a problem, ask them for a solution. If they've got no solution, if it's keep things the way they are, that's cave person. And they come and don't just think that it's just, my mom's a Trumper. I hate to admit it, but she's got a Trump flag in her yard. I work on her constantly. She's not evil. She's just looking at the world a certain way. So don't think that my mom is a cave person just because she's got that political alignment. I know just as many cave people that have environmental science degrees and drive a Prius and all that in Asheville, and they're just as much NIMBYs. So it's not a political persuasion, it's a mindset. So work with your leaders and make sure that you're reaching them. And just check in. Are you catching this? Does this work for you? Don't just leave it as I've just dumped information on you. Now you're educated. You don't know if it's absorbed.
Maybe one more question and then turn it over.
Yeah. I think on this piece too of thinking about your leaders and understanding that at the end of the day, it's personal, it's political. That's a big thing that we talk about in our course. And I think planners in particular, they fall victim to thinking it's a technical exercise. And really it's about telling a story, and it's understanding the politics. Who are the leaders that are going to be making those decisions and ultimately voting on these regulations? We are in election season. I'm not going to get too political. I will say today is the last day to register to vote in Georgia. So if you have not done so, please get on your phone immediately and do that and submit a question. We actually have 2 property tax reforms on the Georgia ballot this year. I'm not going to ask you to give your opinion on them, but I am going to ask you to give us some advice on how we should think about these. So just to give you a quick overview, one is about increasing the personal property tax exemption from $7,500 to $20,000. Property's gotten more expensive. I'm sure that's what that's based on. But I think the more interesting one is actually Georgia Amendment 1. And this amendment would tie property tax increases for those with homestead exemptions to inflation as opposed to market value. So I think this is similar to, state of Texas does something like this where they cap the amount your property tax can increase. Famously, California has Prop 13 that caps it very low. How should we think about these reforms? This is a very technical question that we're being asked to vote on as Georgia residents. What should we do?
Florida has one called Save Our Homes Amendment, and I voted for it in 1992, the year I graduated from college, as a renter. And it's a cap on the growth and value for a homeowner. I was nowhere near a homeowner. It just sounded cool. Like, hey, let's let people have affordable taxation. Yes. Well, what it did, and I'm not the only one responsible for this, but what it did is it capped tax growth to CPI, which is inflation, or 3%, which is ever lower of the two, right? So y'all remember what we just went through with inflation where it was 7%? The revenue growth for the city was at 3% because that was the arrestor of the cap. Okay, let me ask y'all a question. Do roads and pipes and police officers' salaries, do those follow CPI or a cap? No, they're following what's going on in the rate in the market. So it may feel good to say, I want to pay less taxes, but what you're immediately doing is you're making your city impoverished. That the only way they can get new revenue is they've got to import more people. They have to grow more people to grow money. And that's the trap that all of these places have gotten into. There's a great colonial barb from the 1700s. Don't tax me, don't tax thee, tax the fella behind the tree. We're a country of tax evaders. We threw tea in the water because we didn't like the tax, right? The reason why we do those red-black models, I didn't say this at all. We're the first company that's ever done that, where we've linked cost of municipal systems to the revenues. We did that to prove that you could do it. That's the way that the cities are going to have to mutate their finance systems to be able to pay for themselves. It's completely arbitrary to tax on value anyway. Tax on how people use the system and then apply the subsidies to people who can least afford the community. Rather than this crapshoot that we have now. So Ellen's got some questions.
I am going to start opening up a couple of the questions from Slido and from the audience. But I really want to pick up on what you just talked about, that you guys are the first to actually tie, here's how much revenue you're generating, and here's actually also the maintenance costs and the costs of repairing that.
We keep that on the down low because we want people to get too excited about it. It's just like, oh, this is just math. Because if it seems like new, if we were out broadcasting that,
it's very scary.
It freaked people out. So we just don't tell people.
But this also sort of gets to a bit of the question I had, which was, on the one hand, if your visualizations are all about showing us how much mixed use downtowns always are generating these really high rates. And yet that's also because they're being taxed at a higher rate. So where is the sweet spot? You need to generate revenue to pay for all the roads and all this other stuff outside of the, even more of it outside of downtown, but including the downtowns. So is the sweet spot to sort of just absolutely hit that equal? Or if we do need, I mean, every city has got to is going to have to fix its roads, as you said, this big generational problem. What are you recommending to cities?
Well, the hard part is we're consultants and we're not academia, but I think there is a place to study this in academia. I don't know where it starts. If you think of a place like Boston or take any town, Brevard's is a good example, where there's a core, and every American city's always had a suburb. It started as the walkable neighborhoods outside of the core, and then it expanded to the streetcar neighborhoods, and then it expanded to suburbia. But there was always a mountain that funded a donut around it. The paradigm shift is something like Gwinnett, where you don't see that. It just becomes a carpet. And that can afford itself until you reach the edges. And it becomes like fighting obesity by buying bigger clothes. It works so long as you're getting the new revenues from chewing through farms. But once you have to start paying for it, it becomes cataclysmic. So I think I don't think it's intentional. I think that when people set up property tax policies way back when, they knew they were taking out of the core. And also the people that were property owners in the core mostly lived in the neighborhoods outside the core. So they knew that this was symbiotic. It's the modern American city that's never really thought about it and just been in this kind of like sugar high of suburban growth.
All right, we've got a lot of questions, but the two most popular ones. First one actually just is, what are the origins of our current tax model? How did it become ubiquitous? And are there other models used internationally that we might look at? And I don't know. You can just say, well, I'm not.
No. Actually, I went to that IAAO conference because there's one of the standards that I kind of stumbled into, or we stumbled into, taking the buildings off the earth and just looking at the dirt value per acre. The mall land was valued half the value of the parcels across the street from the mall, same zoning category. So I asked the assessor, and the assessor said, well, the mall's bigger, the more land you have, the lower the value. And I was like, why? And she's like, because there's less people that can afford large tracts of land. Therefore, we have to give it a discount because of the lack of demand. And I was like, so I can get more of your limited commodity and you give me a discount? She's like, yeah. I'm like, does that work that way with other limited commodities like diamonds? If I get a bigger diamond, is it cheaper? Because surely less people can afford big diamonds. Everybody in the room's laughing, the mayor included. And she goes, well, that's just our standard. So I take that standard to the assessors conference. And I kid you, I'm not kidding. Their magazine is called Fair and Equitable. So I asked them, I'm like, how is this fair and how is it equitable? To their credit, they go, it's not. And I had a picture of Moses holding the 10 Commandments, and I photoshopped tax code across the top of them. And I said, did Moses deliver you this standard? Where did it come from? And they, by the way, they laughed at that joke. And they're like, we don't know. You should talk to Larry. I'm like, Larry who? They're like, Larry Clark. So I tracked this guy, Larry Clark, down, who's like the Scott Bernstein of the Assessors Association. And Larry's like, yeah, it's not fair. It's not equitable. Now that you point that out, it's probably something to do with the tax policies that came from England, has to do with agricultural policies. And we just took the English tax policy standards when we came to America, and it really hasn't changed much. I was like, dude, you're such a nerd. And but he's like, we can change it. It'll just take a while to get through the system, Joe. You know, I gotta understand the system's a little weird. Oh, by the way, I can get a master's degree in urban design, city administration, engineering. Can you get a master's degree in property assessment? No. The requirements to be a property assessor in the state of North Carolina is you need to have a high school education, and then you have to take one test. And in that test, you pass it, you become an assessor. They still teach the 4 colors of property cycle. Guess which 4 colors they are? Same as redlining. Same cycle. They didn't realize it was redlining.
I know. Yeah, that part has always shocked me. All right, where do tax breaks and incentives fit into this equation? Is there a model that incentivizes long-term large development without overburdening cities or counties? And I would couple that with also then, and what about all the incremental development and the small scale folks that
Yeah.
never seem to get the tax breaks.
Well, I mean, but before I get to the tax breaks, there, like when I was at the assessors conference, this guy, Richard Almy, who's a super genius, he's like, well, what kind of system would you like to see? And I'm like, I just want to see a system. This is before we did the red black models. And I'm like, at the very least, it should be a pay as you go. So if you choose to live 20 miles out there, that's your choice. The system shouldn't have to pick up your choice. And he goes, oh, you're talking about it like the taxes in Estonia. And I'm like, I don't know. I mean, did you all learn about Estonia taxes? I didn't. It's like, I didn't even know Canadian tax systems. Getting educated in the United States, we're patently illiterate about other systems and on the planet. New Zealand's got good, a more equitable tax system. Estonia, obviously, Canada does a better job. So I think there's lots of things we could do better. But why do we even hang on to this system? Like the tax break question is a perfect one. It's like you're giving a relief for what, and how is that going to be applied? Are you tracking that? When we go to places that they do TIF, tax increment financing. Like in Kansas State, they tax commercial 2.5 times higher per square foot than single family. And some of the commercial properties that were mixed use got a TIF for higher debt because of all the complexity of going through the process. Or anybody that's tried to build affordable housing, you might as well just take a brick and slap yourself in the head. That they bought down the cost of that by giving it a tax break, and people are like, they got a tax break. And I sat there and did a map and showed them all of the properties that were getting that 40% tax versus the 2 times that at commercial. And I said, y'all are getting a tax break just baked into the system. They're just asking for it, right? So I think we need to look at the whole system and realize there's already subsidies baked into it, and just be transparent about it. Show people.
Well, I mean, this does get also into the question on Georgist taxation, which was also asked, and you might want to explain a little bit about that and what your thoughts are. Is it fairer?
Anybody know Henry George? Got a couple people. Anybody hear of land value tax? So Henry George was actually part of that reform movement. He's sort of like the Chuck Maroon of that era. Very popular. He has his own conferences. He has his own book about social equity. And he had this thesis that you should be taxed on land, not your improvement on the land. And the thinking is, if I've got pipes and, you just step off the Mayflower and you hold land, you get the land. And then let's move forward to the 1800s where all of these immigrants come to Boston and the prices of everything goes up. And I could just sit on that land and do nothing with it, right? Meanwhile, the community is covering the cost of the garbage truck, the police officer, and everything else. But I'm being taxed on how I use the land, and there's no building there, so I'm taxed really low. But the costs given to that land are super high. He's like, we should flip that. For any of you that have never heard of this before, this woman at one of the conferences, her name is Elizabeth Maggie Phillips, the Georgist. And she was like, we can't teach adults this stuff because adults are too set in their way. So I'm going to work with kids. So she invented a board game that's now called Monopoly. How do you, like, we've all played Monopoly, right? That's Georgia's policy. How do you win Monopoly? Land assembly. There's certain ones that are more valuable than others. And when you start putting buildings on it, that's how you can win the game. She's taught us that as kids, and we somehow can't figure out how to put that into the municipal system. So now you know.
Great. All right. Last question. And there's a couple variations on this question, but really, what examples have you seen of cities, your clients, I'm assuming, using these insights to reorient their policies towards improving net value per acre? And who's actually picked up on it, and what's?
There's some are better than others. I mean, Gwinnett County was actually kind of awesome. That meeting, that exchange that I had with that county commissioner, it was a private meeting of stakeholders the night before the actual presentation, and it got kind of dicey. And I remember getting in an argument with that commissioner, and she kept on going back and back and saying, "But we're not urban, we're not urban, we're not urban." And finally I just gave up. And you work in consulting. There's this point at which you're just like, I don't care. I'm going back to Asheville. I'm never going to work here again. consultant suicide move. I'm going to be really honest. And so I said to her, I said, ma'am, 40% of your population are South Asian, Korean. You've got the highest Korean population east of the Mississippi. Hispanic, another 20% are African American. You're looking at 60% of your community are people of color. And I'm sorry, I don't know who this we is, but as I look around the room, I'm the darkest person in the room right now. And you could hear a pin drop, and my lead analyst who grew up in Raleigh was like trying to get under the table. And I just knew, I was like, oh, I went way too far on that one. And I just moved to the next question. But after that, I went to my client and I apologized. I'm like, I'm sorry I did that, but it's the truth. And she said, thank you. She goes, we need to start talking about this way. And thank you for doing that. I had the privilege of being able to rip the Band-Aid off in that meeting. And they've had me back 3 times. I'm actually going back, 2 weeks from now? I'll be back in Gwinnett County speaking with them. Now this isn't an anathema for them. I'm like Dr. Phil of Gwinnett County. I'm like, y'all got a problem? Your sister's on the pills, just love each other. It's like, anyway, you have to help them exercise that. But a lot of clients, I've had clients come up to me, they're really sophisticated. Davis, California, the vice mayor who was head of the finance committee, ran up on stage afterward and he was like so excited. And he goes, I've seen my city with new eyes, like I've never been here before. It was kind of awesome. It's just, can I help you see yourself differently? Rancho Cucamonga, California, the vice mayor was like, I want purple mountains. Like, good, you got it. It's like, help people understand.
Oh, that's awesome. All right. Well, there are lots more questions, but we're going to have to answer those at the reception. So I'm going to close at this point. Thank you, Joe, Elizabeth, Christy. Thank you, all of you in attendance. You've been listening to episode 40 of Redesigning Cities, the Speedwell Foundation Talks at Georgia Tech. A video and podcast of this event will be posted to the Redesigning Cities website. And now I get to invite all of you to go upstairs. It's really, don't leave before you see the amazing spread that we have upstairs. And it's really designed to encourage you to linger and talk about these issues. And let's figure out, what do we do with what you now can't forget? So thank you all very much.